Dear learners and viewers, I'm so very delighted to be able to connect to you for this important discussion. As we have been discussing issues of language and literature in our previous discussions, today for our MEG course, which is British Literature, MEG 2, centering on British drama, we'll discuss one specific text. We'll discuss the evolution of drama also, but we'll focus on Pygmalion by G.B. Shaw as to what kinds of issues, what factors that he wants to communicate through his powerful drama. Dear learners, you will be familiar with the number of texts that we have in this course. We take you through all the major texts in the British drama. We discuss, in our last discussion, we discussed Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, and we have a whole range to acquaint you with all the aspects. Let me, in the beginning, briefly discuss as to why these lectures are important. What we are trying to do, we are trying to orient our students to a kind of basic reading of the text. It is very important that you familiarize yourself with the primary text. A summary, a central idea, basic themes are important only when you are aware of, when you have read the text at least twice. You see, this at this level, at the master's level, we need to focus at words, we need to focus at the presentation. And as they say, between the lines also we have to go as to what the author, the dramatist wanted to say, or try to hide something. This is very important. So in our endeavor to understand the storiness of the story or playfulness in the play, it is important that you study the entire play. And also to set up comparison, also to devise a way as to how we can interconnect those plays, how the notion of a hero, how notion of a plot, how notion of characterization evolves, changes, kind of what are the similarities. For example, when we will discuss today the play by G.B. Shaw, we'll find that a different kind of treatment of characterization takes place. G.B. Shaw looks at it differently. The way Shakespeare had handled his characterization, the way Greek masters of drama, they had talked about this. So it is important for you to look at and compare, contrast as to what are the changes which are increasingly visible before us. So let us discuss as to, I think in today's thing, we will discuss as to how the background of English drama from the Restoration period to Bernard Shaw is important. I remember I discussed with you as to why the socio-political cultural situation is important in the understanding of a drama. Broad acquaintance with Bernard Shaw's life, his plays, his background. You know that he was a Nobel laureate. He had a huge name and fame. He had a versatile personality. We'll discuss about that, important events, and literary and intellectual influences on him, his own development as a playwright. So this is how we'll discuss as to, like, Pygmalion as a play about phonetics, about class distinction, snobbery, kind of manners, middle class morality, and the character of Doolittle. Man-woman relationship in the play, Higgins' mother fixation. Broadly, it has been interpreted as some kind of Oedipal complex. Also, we'll also hint at Higgins and Eliza's equation. Eliza the fighter and the feminist, the way the character evolves. I think Higgins and the other person, those who set up the bet, they can still be treated as flat characters. But when you look at Eliza, the kind of evolution and dynamism that you see in this, you will find that the way she from a kind of street side flower girl to the way she is able to resist Higgins' ideas towards the end. You find that she is a fighter and then a feminist. So let me take you through how British drama evolves 1642 onwards, after the turmoil on the political front in England, you find that the closing of the English theatre in 1642 ended a glorious phase of English drama, and its reopening in 1660 marked a decisive break with the past. This break comes with a shift in the themes, in the characterization, in the overall treatment. We find that the first 25 years of the period, the reign of Charles II, were clearly marked by a spirit of reason, empiricism, and license. Inductive method of Bacon, anti-idealistic political theory of Hobbes, Leviathan, and the revolutionary astronomy of Copernicus and Galileo. We discussed that how a kind of Renaissance temper takes over, a spirit of skepticism, a spirit of science and reason, and the earlier kind of emphasis on like mannerisms and kind of ways of noble aristocratic life, that has given way to this kind of, I mean, normally what critical analysts dub it as, they say that this is a kind of shift from this world being a theocentric world to a homocentric world. We are beginning to understand that how that is important. And the new age dispersed with faith, mystery, and intellectual authority. This is how you can make sense of the shift, and you will find that in the first couple of units there is a detailed description in your course material, and how it mistrusted the supernatural and denigrated imagination. It discarded the old ethnic and called for a practical and pragmatic value system which ridiculed the notion of chastity and marital fidelity. So you find that in terms of themes, characterization, plot, there are various changes we are beginning to experience. And the theatre itself followed the French model, underwent a perceptible change. So you find the French influence, the trends of French theatre are coming. The auditorium and enclosed place was long and narrow, with the stage surrounded on three sides by the audience. From like we discussed in University, which we found that how Chamberlain's Men and the theatre company, the Globe, you had different kind of theatrical presentation. Here you find that the stage is surrounded on three sides by the audience. Artificial light, sets of properties were introduced. So stage props, the kind of the inputs to enhance the impact of the story is created in terms of dress material, in terms of other manual inputs on the stage you find, and more importantly, women invaded the stage as actresses. Initially, before 1642, you find that men used to play the role of lady characters. But here you find that now ladies are coming and they are making they are playing the role of women characters. We also find, in terms of the understanding of the changes in the dramatic stage, a blend of emotions and intellectual ingenuity characterized by conceit. And we find that we find that new ideas and new stories for the readers. And we find that Restoration Comedy of Manners likewise provided a critique of manners and morals of the contemporary society, and used many comic devices employed by him, such as disguises, intrigues, farcical action. You find that in Restoration drama there was too much kind of intervention at the level of depiction of even bedroom scenes, but here you find a change. And in the you find we are discussing how French ways, French trends are coming to influence the British drama, and he built his own plays around central characters with marked eccentricities. You find the presence of a miser, presence of a misanthrope, and a hypocrite and a hypochondriac. Hypochondriac is someone who fears too much, who kind of sees too much into the visible images. I mean, we refer Don Quixote as in the Spanish literature, as in the Spanish masterpiece by Cervantes, as a hypochondriac there. So if we look at our today's play, for example, like, we in terms of understanding as far as the evolution, we find that written primarily for the urban class reached the zenith in the plays of Dryden, Etheries, and I'm giving you some examples of how, say some plays of Dryden, The Wild Gallant, Marriage a la Mode, and in the plays of Etheries, The Man of Mode, The Comical Revenge, Wycherley, The Country Wife, and The Gentleman Dancing Master. We find that, and as also in The Plain Dealer, we find Congreve deals with, in his plays, The Old Bachelor, Double Dealer, Love for Love, The Way of the World. So you find that in these plays, the kind of characterization makes a shift. In the Orange period, you find how different plays come in the name of recruiting officer, the Buick's stratagem, and Van Berg's The Provoked Wife relapse carried on the tradition with same modifications. So this is how we can understand. So before we come to the play by G.B. Shaw, it is important to see the finer layers of changes, the modifications which have come in by this time. So when we discuss this play, we find that this play is a sort of romance in 5 acts. You see the kind of following of the traditional Greek ways of handling drama, 5 acts by G.B. Shaw, produced in Germany in 1913, and it was performed in England in 1914. And you find that there are characters, and this play is a humane comedy about love and the English class system. We'll discuss how it is rooted in Greek mythology. Greek mythology, in the sense this character is named after a mythic artist who supposedly sculpted an ideal woman, and subsequently he fell in love with the statue. And so sometimes it is referred to like a kind of relationship between a teacher and taught also. So product of ancient Greek folklore, this character would later be immortalized by the Roman poet Ovid, who wrote about him in the book 10 of the famous kind of meta text, Metamorphoses. Similarly, the male lead in Shaw's Pygmalion, phonetics professor Henry Higgins tries to sculpt a lower class working girl into a well-spoken English lady. So this is how this play evolves. We come to understand that there is a bet that takes place. I'll discuss that in greater detail, but first let me discuss about G.B. Shaw, the famous playwright, the Nobel laureate, the wit, a profound witty person that we know him as. So he was born in Dublin, and he was an iconoclast playwright, journalist, polemicist, scintillating public speaker, art reviewer, and a campaigning socialist. His ideas for a socialist world. We also see his role as an important person to advocate for, to do advocacy for kind of a perfect world. How in eugenics, that the way we call it, he was a part of eugenics thought process and worldview. He left behind him a truly massive corpus of work, about 60 plays, 5 novels, 3 volumes of music criticism, 4 volumes of dance and theatrical criticism, and heaps of social commentary, political theory, and voluminous correspondence. So here is G.B. Shaw for you, and I would suggest that besides when you are studying Pygmalion's text, you also frame an understanding about the complete persona, complete contribution of how G.B. Shaw used to think, how the world, the kind of worldview that he possessed, and the way he viewed the world. He also, when we look at this play, we find that in this play you have a kind of aborted romance between Professor Higgins and Eliza Doolittle. reflects Shaw's own love life, which was always peppered with enamored and beautiful women with whom he flirted outrageously, but with whom he almost never had any further relationship. For example, he had a love marriage to Charlotte Payne Townsend, in which it is well known that he never touched her once. So this is, in that sense, the engagement, the association and negotiation between Higgins and Eliza kind of carries a sense of some kind of autobiographical element in the play. Shaw's inserted handwritten notes to the script with additional stage directions and lines that adds realism to the dialogue. So, this play has a universal appeal. The way it is being performed and translated into so many other languages in the world. Here, kind of Shaw kind of gives, to add to the real idea, real appeal of this play, he kind of adds written notes to the script even towards the end of when the play was completed, with the script was completed, he still wants to add more ideas, more words to it, so that it is able to establish a stronger relationship with the viewers. The printed dialogue shows Eliza's broad Cockney dialect. I ain't dirty. I wash my hands and face before I come. Only in Shaw's handwritten revisions do we get a glimpse of his recommended Cockney pronunciation. You give me a handkerchief. In the pages shown here, Eliza reveals her newly eloquent and polite tones. Yet in spite of this transformation, she still shocks those in her company. Her mastery of language and dialogue is of newer ways. I have found that our students kind of comment in the chat box, and they want to ask. Sometimes it is very challenging to be able to respond to those queries. So I would suggest that you mark your all queries and questions to my email, and then I will be able to answer that after this program. When we look at this play, we find that two old gentlemen meet in the rain one night in a garden, Covent Garden. Professor Higgins is a scientist of phonetics, and Colonel Pickering is a linguist of Indian dialects. He has just come from India. The first bets the other that he can, with his knowledge of phonetics, convince high London of society that in a matter of months he'll be able to transform the Cockney-speaking Covent Garden girl, Eliza Doolittle, into a woman as was poised and well-spoken as a duchess. So this is how, I think we can still relate to this play, the storyline and the plot, because what is the role of a language in our life? What is the role of phonetics? And is this a phonetic-centric play in this? So what we find that these two, when Eliza tries to sell her flowers, this flower girl, wants to sell her flowers to Higgins. He's taking notes, and someone tells her that perhaps this man is noting down everything that she is speaking, and she first sees him as some kind of police person, and kind of says that why is it being looked at like that, and then this conversation, and she also feels fascinated. Can she enter into a new life with an acquisition of new set of words, new vocabulary in her life? Because when Colonel Pickering and Professor Higgins, they say that this transformation is possible. And then the challenge is taken. Higgins starts by having his housekeeper bath Eliza and give her new clothes. Then Eliza's father, Alfred Doolittle, comes to demand the return of his daughter, though his real intention is to hit Higgins up for some money. So, again, this clash between upper class and upper, kind of aristocratic class, and then, the middle class is shown there. And the professor, amused by Doolittle's unusual rhetoric, gives him £5 on his way out. The dustman fails to recognize the now clean, pretty flower as his daughter. So this is how, we find that For a number of months, Higgins trains Eliza to speak properly. 2 trials for Eliza follow. The first occurs as Higgins' mother's home, where Eliza is introduced to as Insford Hills, a trio of mother, daughter and son. The son Freddie is very attracted to her and further taken with what he thinks is her affected small talk when he slips into Cockney. Mrs. Higgins worries that the experiment will lead to problem once it is ended, but Higgins and Pickering are too absorbed in the game to take heed. A second trial, which takes place some months later at an ambassador's party and which is not actually staged, is a resounding success. The wager is definitely won, but Higgins and Pickering are now bored with the project, which causes Eliza to be hurt. She throws Higgins' slipper at him in a rage because she does not know what is to become of her, thereby bewildering him. He suggests she marry somebody. She returns him with the hired jewelry and he accuses her of ingratitude. So this is how, I'm giving you a kind of broad summary. You have to read it in a way, act-wise, scene-wise, and Higgins rushes to his mother. This play has a subplot like, Higgins, Professor Higgins' relationship with his mother, the kind of age that he is in, and the way he is not able to marry someone else. And then if we look at closely the dialogues that he has with the mother, you find that there is a sense of Oedipal, is a hint that there is some kind of Oedipus complex there. You have to, besides that, you have to study that also. We'll discuss that in some later meeting, but today we are focusing more on the storyline and the major sense of action. And then, the way when Eliza runs away, on his tail is Eliza's father, now unhappily rich from the trust of a deceased millionaire who took to heart Higgins' recommendation that Doolittle was England's most original moralist. Mrs. Higgins, who has been hiding Eliza upstairs all along, chides the two of them for playing with the girl's affections. When she enters, Eliza thanks Pickering for always treating her like a lady, but threatens Higgins that she will go work with his rival Finetician. The outraged Higgins cannot help but start to admire her. As Eliza leaves for her father's wedding, Higgins shouts out a few errands for her to run, assuming that she will return to him at Wimpole Street. Eliza, who has a love-lorn sweetheart in Freddie and the wherewithal to pass as a duchess, never makes it clear whether she will or not. In this, we find that a heavy, lightweight summer thunderstorm opens the play, caught the unexpected downpour, and this kind of discussion and the cockneyed language use is important. And when you are reading this, you will see how language is being handled in a street, and how university teachers like Professor Higgins, they look at it, and how language can be used to kind of to even cheat people. So you find that as an elderly military gentleman enters from the rain, and this is again, broadly about the discussion that takes place between Colonel Pickering and then Higgins as to how it is possible to make use of language, and how it is possible to kind of transform a flower girl into a kind of aristocratic lady, a duchess, for example. So this is how, a kind of hysterical protestation on her part, that she is only a poor girl who has done no wrong. The refugees from the rain crowd around her, and the note taker with considerable hostility towards the letter, whom they believe to be an undercover cop. So this is how, this play evolves. And I would, kind of say that this play talks about class distinction,